What's up, nerds? It's that time of year. You and I are about to get drunk. We're about to get spooky. I'm your boy Mike Dangerous, and this is Talking Shots. You know I like video games. If you follow this channel, you probably like video games too. Spooky games have been around since gaming itself. Haunted House in the Atari 2600 is probably the first example, and it's about as spooky as games from 40 years ago could be. Damn, it's been 40 years? It's been a hot minute. Of course, the NES ushered in an area that's more recognizable in a modern context. Dude, the gaming landscape before 1985 really was the Wild West. Like, there was an adapter for the ColecoVision that let you play Atari 2600 games. Can you imagine if Sony was just like, yeah dude, put in an Xbox One game, it'll work. The NES had its horror-themed games like Friday the 13th and to an extent, even Castlevania. However, these had a much greater emphasis on action more than horror. I mean, the NES can only produce so many pixels, so what do you expect? The AVGN video reviewing these games was scarier. James Rolfe, if you're watching this, I love you. The Super Nintendo was more of the same. Yeah, Zombies Ate My Neighbors is fun, and you can make the argument that Super Metroid borrows heavily from horror motifs. However, the best example of horror on the console is a game we didn't even get in the States, because we never get anything cool. Clock Tower for the Super Famicom was a point-and-click adventure horror game. You play as adopted orphan Jennifer Simpson, who, funny enough, is based off of actor Jennifer Connelly in her appearance in a movie called Phenomena. My first childhood crush. Sorry, Laura Dern.
You're dead in this town, as is your puppet show.
Shortly after arriving at the Barrows family mansion, one of the other orphans is then murdered by the game's antagonist, Scissorhands. Is that his name? Scissorman, not Scissorhands. Not the f***ing Johnny Depp movie. Jennifer must then escape Barrows mansion while avoiding Scissorman, leading to one of the game's multiple endings. We never got the original game, but we did get its sequel eventually on the PlayStation. The PlayStation was a huge step forward when it came to horror games. However, it would be beat by another ill-fated console. Now, I highly doubt you grew up with anybody that owned a 3DO, because let's face it, it cost $700 in 1993. However, the first Alone in the Dark game was released initially for the 3DO. Alone in the Dark is generally considered to be the forefather of survival horror as we would know it today. Then Uwe Boll made a movie, and it was really And then years later, they made another Alone in the Dark game for the 360, and it was also really but we don't talk about those. The original did eventually make it over to the Sega Saturn and the PS1, but by that point, the mother of all survival horror games as we know it today had dropped. Resident Evil. We all know this one. It had awkward tank controls, hokey acting, and a big-ass mansion to explore. Look, it laid the groundwork for horror as we know it in gaming forever, and as much as I want to sit here and make fun of this game, the first time you meet a zombie, it's one of the most iconic moments in gaming ever. The series really got good with its sequels 2, 3, and Veronica, redefined itself with 4, got mediocre with 5, and turned into Call of Duty for Resident Evil 6, and of course, redefined itself once again with Resident Evil 7. Now yes, I can hear your keyboards clacking away in all caps that Resident Evil 7 really is just a response to PT being cancelled. PT being the long-awaited Silent Hills game produced by Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, and starring Norman Reedus. Damn, am I drunk already? I know it was nothing but cancel potential, and I still cry every night, but instead of looking what could have been, I want to look back at the Sega Saturn. Because I'm Mike Dangerous. And none of my friends want to talk about the Sega Saturn, so instead I get drunk on the internet and make you listen to me talk about the Sega Saturn. This next one's kind of cheating because it did originally come out on the 3DO, but we already established no one really knows what that is except for nerds like me, so we're going to talk about the Saturn version. D was released in 1995 for both the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. D is basically an interactive movie that has adventure game elements in it, a horror genre storyline, and heavy use of full motion video. The player takes control of Laura Harris, played by digital actress Laura, which also appears in other games developed by Warp, although the series are completely unrelated. The player directs Laura's movements as she explores the game's environment, solves puzzles, and unravels the story. The movements occur through FMV cut sequences as she walks to the desired location. Okay, so FMV, or full motion video, was a very common occurrence in the early 90s. It was basically to show off newfangled CD technology, and games like Night Trap used it heavily, which, fun fact, basically is responsible for starting the ESRB, and that whole game is literally just cheesy FMVs. We thought we were so cool, but we weren't. Anyway, the player is greeted with a static screen which may contain items they can interact with or other paths to direct Laura. The player is only given 2 real-time hours to complete the game with no save or pause function. That's fucking hardcore. Depending on the player's actions, there are different endings. If that's not 90s hardcore, I don't know what is. The game had 2 sequels, Enemy Zero and D2, which more resemble video games and not so much Proto-Heavy Rain. Now the creator, Kenji Eno, is a wild mother. Whoa! Eno kept many of the violent sequences a secret from other developers. When the game was completed, he submitted a clean version for approval. He deliberately submitted the master late, knowing that the penalty would be that he would have to hand deliver it. So on the plane there, he swapped the clean and the actual master, completely bypassing the ESRB at the time. Wild. Of course, what we deemed horrific in the 90s is a far cry from where we are today. With indie development on the rise since the early 2000s, it was only a matter of time before indie developers would dominate the genre in ways that even major studios struggled to do. Penumbra and its sequel Amnesia are probably the first 2 examples of viral hits when it comes to the indie horror genre. Hey, Lovecraftian horror was huge in the early 2000s, and this game dropping right around the YouTube Let's Play craze definitely helped. One game that capitalized on the whole creepypasta thing was 2012's Slender: The 7 Pages. I lied. It's Slender the 8 Pages. That one up. Some people call this one Flashlight Simulator, and that makes me laugh. This one, of course, is based off the whole Slender Man craze that took the early 2010s by storm. The premise is fairly simple. Find all 8 pages before Slender Man gets you. However, it seems like it's the simplicity that would drive the indie horror genre forward. Games like Among the Sleep, to parodies like Spooky's House of Jump Scares, to games that walked the AAA border like Outlast, were all successful in the wake of games like Slender. However, the obvious elephant in the room is a game called Five Nights at Freddy's. This one often gets called Jump Scare Simulator, as the whole point of the game is to finish your shift as a security guard in a spooky haunted Chuck E. Cheese type pizzeria. This game spawned 3 sequels and a presence on YouTube like never seen before. It had the best marketing strategy, honestly, which is word of mouth. Today, with VR, I'm really excited to see where the horror genre takes us. I remember back when smartphone VR headsets were a thing, I remember a lot of them had demos for horror games as a part of the thing at the store. I don't remember, dude, I haven't been to a store in like 700 years. Horror has an advantage with video games because it's an interactive medium, and some say that video games are the best medium for horror because of its interactive nature. With the month of October ahead of us, what better time to go back and scare the shit out of ourselves with some good, spooky video games. I know I left out a lot like Fatal Frame and Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. That one straight up pulls a Metal Gear Solid to f with you. There's so many more to cover, but don't worry. Next week we'll be talking about one in particular that's very near and dear to my heart. So what do you think? What are some of your favorite horror video games? Do you think I have awful opinions? Probably. Don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below. I am awful at talking unscripted. As always, don't forget to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, you can always hit us up on Patreon, link in the description down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm your boy Mike Dangerous. I'll catch you next week.